Welcome to Torah on the Go. Whether you are walking your dog or on the Peloton, taking a moment from your work, or pretending to work right now, I'm glad that you're studying with us. I am sitting here with my podcast partner, Rabbi Feinstein.
Afternoon.
We have built up to this moment. We are now at chapter 14 and 15 of the book of Exodus. And the children of Israel thought that they were at Pi HaCherut, the beginning of their journey to freedom. And sure enough, Pharaoh wakes up and decides,
what did I do?
What did I do?
In the movie, this is one of the great inventions of Cecil B. DeMille, because it's his wife, Nefertiti, who really always loved Moses more than him, who says, what kind of man are you to let slaves beat you, a slave god beat you? And so in order to rescue his masculinity, he has to, this is such a 1950s, 1960s drama. He has to go and ends up destroying himself. But it's her voice that's the hardening of his heart that sends, bring me my armor, he says, that sends Pharaoh off into war against God.
And it reveals in this moment, from the perspective of the Jewish people, the idea that they had just experienced this redemption. They just experienced all these miracles.
10 plagues. 10 plagues. The most horrifying things the world's ever seen. But it ain't enough for Jews.
But it's not enough for Jews. No. Right. So what do? They scream at Moses.
Yeah.
And they scream at God,
right? Oh, but it's more than screaming. I have to interrupt you just for, I'm sorry. But you have to know that in the Torah, it doesn't matter how imminent a horrifying danger is, there's always time for an articulate kvetch.
Right.
The soliloquy of kvetching is one of the beautiful arts of the Torah. So it doesn't matter that Pharaoh's armies are rushing down the hill with chariots and spears and arrows and God knows what other kind of horrifying death. The Israelites have enough time to say, were there not enough graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die in the wilderness? Is this not what we told? I mean, they become so articulate.
Right. But they become articulate characters like from a Shalom Aleichem story.
It's beautiful.
They speak in like Yiddishisms, like, we should have died in Egypt than die in the desert.
What kind of schnook are you? You did you schmendrick. Look what you did to us.
That's how I hear them. That's how I hear the voices in the Torah.
Right. I think in the movie, though, because you have Edward G. Robinson playing Dathan with that, look what you did to us now. Yeah. But they become articulate. Right. And so the Torah actually takes the words. Torah is very, very economical, very parsimonious when it comes to words, but it spends the words to tell us how all of those miracles are erased in their memory, and they're so skeptical, so cynical at that moment.
Right. There's a lot of midrash written about what happens right before the sea splits. In the Torah, Moses calls out to God, and God answers Moses, ma titzak alai.
It's a great line.
Okay? And literally, I could hear, again, with a heavy Yiddish accent, for what do you yell at me, right? It's.
Why are you praying?
Why are you?
Because the next word is sa, which is
right.
Move.
Move, right. So there's a lot of midrash. Why are you yelling at me? Or why are you yelling, Eli, ma titzak, Eli, come to me. Walk, go. Eli said, go walk to me, right? And Moses starts walking. He raises his hands, and the sea splits.
Well, then he tells him, "Raise your hand over the sea, and it'll open."
Now, but there's in Midrash a character that's introduced to this entire narrative that's not Moses.
That's right.
It's actually Aaron's brother-in-law. It's the prince of the tribe of Judah. Okay, related. This is somebody that would sit at Moses' Passover table, but he is not part of the story. His name is not mentioned at this point in the Torah. It's mentioned later in the Torah, and his name is Nachshon. He is the prince of Judah. And according to Midrash, the sea doesn't split. He begins to walk into the sea.
It's a beautiful story.
With complete faith.
It's a beautiful story. Because in the Torah story, right, the people are screaming. Moses doesn't know what to do. He turns to God. God says, don't scream, don't pray, move, and tells him, hold your hand over the sea. It's all God-centric. It's all God's doing. But the rabbis of the Midrash understood something. By the time of the Midrash, they had a different view of how history works. And they understood that we are partners with God in bringing redemption. But it takes something. It takes something out of us. And so they introduced this character, Nachshon ben Aminadav, and that's also interesting what his name is. And the story is, of course, he jumps into water. And like everyone looks at him and says, what are you, nuts? You're going to drown. You don't know how to swim. And he goes out in the water till it's up to his waist. And we imagine that his family's begging him to come back. And he goes out to the waters up to his chest. And now no one's paying attention to Pharaoh. They're all watching this fool go out in the water. And the story is that he takes one more step and he disappears under the water. And as the bubbles start coming up to the surface, that's when the sea splits.
Right.
When one human being is willing to say, I will give up everything that's me, my life, my position, I will give up my life to bring redemption. God says, okay, now I'm going to make it happen. It is such an interesting revision, change in the way that we understand how redemption comes to the world. It becomes a partnership between humanity and God.
And this becomes this midrash more than any becomes a kind of defining trope of the Jewish people. I would say, especially with the advent of the modern Zionist era.
Right.
Right. Looking for nachshons is a common phrase in Hebrew in Israel. Right. That's what the army is looking. They're looking for people who want to lead, people who step into the front and say, follow me, acharei. Right. Exactly. Yeah. And nachshon ends up becoming this character as a symbol amidst this chaotic moment in the narrative for the Jewish people and Moses and God. Nobody knew what to do. God has to take everybody, by the shirt and say, calm down. We're fine. And Nachshon is this character introduced by the rabbinic tradition of Midrash to explain in the story, well, there was actually one person who had faith the entire time.
Yeah, and he doesn't know. We don't know. Is the sea really going to split?
Right.
And, the water's cold and the bottom is muddy and the currents are strong and you don't know he doesn't know if he's just giving up his life for a dream or if this is really a reality. And then, of course, just to make it more complicated, there are two glosses on this story. They're modern glosses, but they're very charming. One gloss is, Nachshon didn't jump in. He fell in. Mm-hmm. He tripped. Mm-hmm. Now think about that. How many times do we find ourselves as the leader, not on purpose, but by accident? And then there's another gloss, which is even better, which is someone shoved him.
Yeah. Right?
Sometimes, you've spoken about this before, but sometimes a leader needs someone behind him to shove him and say, you're going to be the first, go. Mm-hmm. And they shove him into the water. And then he understands. When he's in the water, now he understands what his role is. But it takes a push. It takes a push because it's still a suspenseful story. You don't know what's going to happen.
There's a wonderful midrash by Rav Kook that Rav Kook wrote that as the Jews are passing through the sea, right? The Torah tells us that there are two walls on either side of the Jewish people. And actually, I think the most beautiful portrayal of this actually is in the Prince of Egypt. There you see whales and fish and all kinds of things in the water. The water lights up because of the lightning, and they see there's two walls of water on either side of them protecting them. And as they go through, and Rav Kook writes this beautiful, beautiful midrash that in the midst of the sea, at the bottom of the water, there is an orange tree. There's an orange grove. Mm. And the children of Israel get to taste the fruit of the land of Israel to understand what they're walking towards.
What they're walking toward, right.
And so at the bottom of the Sea of Reeds, there is an orange grove for us to find one day, you and I. We need to set out like pirates with a map at some point. We'll get a ship. This is what I imagine. We'll get a small boat and a lot, and we'll just set out and just try and I don't even know. I don't even know the language to describe what I'm trying to see. But it's something like the scene from Titanic.
No, but in the middle of the crisis, what draws you forward is a taste of what you're going toward.
Right.
It's a beautiful image. Now, it's important to see it in the text itself. The text itself is a complicated, in some ways, messy text.
Right.
And the Torah is, exquisitely edited. So when it's badly edited, you can either say, bad editor, but I think more than that, the better theory is that an event when events is happening around us, like waters are swirling around us, it's hard to figure out exactly what's going on. So you have two stories here. One is a very naturalistic story. This was the Sea of Reeds, not the Red Sea. This was a swamp. And all night long, the wind blew and the tide went out. It's the delta of the Nile. The tide goes out, and Moses, who had crossed this several times, knew how to get across. He knew where the rocks were, as it were. And it's a completely naturalistic story. And the miracle wasn't that the sea, it was a miracle. It was a natural event. The miracle was that Pharaoh wasn't chasing us anymore. In fact, at the end of the story, it says the chariot wheels got stuck in the mud and they couldn't pursue the Israelites. Like the police couldn't chase them anymore. The other story is the miracle story you see in the movie, which is the water was it was the Red Sea, and the water was this wall on both sides, and we walk through and you can see the fish in the water and that kind of stuff. The most important thing of it is remember Genesis. Because Exodus as a book is always referring back to Genesis. The second act of creation in Genesis was the splitting of the water. The world was all water. It was all chaos. Water represents chaos. And God opens the water and creates dry land. God opens the chaos and creates cosmos. Here we have a story in which the chaos of history, represented by slavery, which is the worst thing human beings do to each other, opens up, and now suddenly history emerges, a journey from slavery to freedom, from bondage to the promised land. That's what the story represents. This is now the opening of history that's as ordered as cosmos is in nature.
That's beautiful. And when that cosmos, when that order is created, the children of Israel are on the other side, and the first, let's say, miracle is actually initiated by the children of Israel themselves. We are introduced to the Song of the Sea.
Oh, it's beautiful.
The Song of the Sea.
Right.
And so the Torah tells us, Az yashir Moshe v'nei Yisrael tashira hazot la'Adonai vayomru lemor. The grammar, again, it's a strange sentence that then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song for God, and they sang him singing. Meaning to say they were all singing. Moses and the children of Israel, according to the Torah, according to the way the rabbis understand it, everybody began singing in unison, extemporaneously, this song that nobody had ever heard before.
Yeah.
So all of us innovate the same song at the same moment and sing in unison the same words. So, okay, so first of all, during my time studying the Hebrew Bible, there are many who argue that the Song of the Sea is actually the oldest piece in the entire Torah.
Yeah.
Okay? So you think to yourself, well, how does an oral tradition get written down? Well, an oral tradition certainly has to begin as an oral tradition. What's the easiest way to remember an oral tradition? It's poetry, or it's a song.
It's a song.
Right? And so the times in the Torah, basically Song of the Sea and the second to last Parsha Ha'azinu, they both are portrayed as these songs in the Torah. Even if you look at the Torah itself, if you come up to the Bima and look at the Torah, it shows that it's no longer written in narrative column form. It's kind of written in these couplets that are spread out over the column.
Right.
And so here we are introduced to this very old piece of text that tells us that this song was crucially important to the children of Israel, to our tradition. We sang it. God didn't instruct us to sing it.
Yeah.
We sang this. We sang this. We sang the song of appreciation, a song of freedom. And actually, that tradition isn't only our own. I mean, ours might be the oldest song that we have of record, but every people that achieves freedom does it through song. There is songs of freedom in every tradition. Here in the United States, we're most familiar with the songs of freedom from civil rights movement, or even during slavery, there were songs of freedom. But certainly every people that goes through an enslavement and a pursuit of freedom and a pursuit of liberation, their pursuit is accompanied by a soundtrack.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
And this is our soundtrack.
Yeah. So there's a midrash that's so beautiful that when they got to the other side of the sea, they wanted to sing, but they couldn't. They opened their mouths and they couldn't sing because slavery had stolen song out of the souls of the people Israel. And they started to cry because they couldn't sing. And God sees their cry, and God sends all the birds, all the songbirds of the world, to that place in the world to teach Bnei Israel, to teach the children of Israel to sing again. And so it was a custom in Eastern Europe on this Shabbat, the Shabbat of Shabbat Shirah, the Sabbath that we read this story, to go outside, which is wintertime. It's always snowy and cold in Poland, and in wintertime. And the kids would go outside the synagogue and spread cookie crumbs and breadcrumbs all over the sidewalks in front of the synagogue. So whatever birds are left in the neighborhood in the winter would have something to eat, as a say thank you for teaching us how to sing.
It's beautiful, and we, of course, in synagogues all across the world, try to create musical moments during this time. We just had a concert. Right. We have special moments always that surround Shabbat Shira. Cantor Rafi's her installation was Shabbat Shira. So Shabbat Shira has a relationship with the whole cantorial tradition.
Yeah.
In many ways, points to Shabbat Shira, points to this song, and says we are a tradition of musicality.
And then at the end of the episode, after the song, first Moses sings it, then Miriam sings it. Miriam probably sung it first, but that's okay. And then Moses, that's okay. It's not. They should have put her first in the text. There's a line that ends the whole narrative, and the line is "Ve'aminu ba'Adonayu b'Moshe avdo," that the people of Israel saw all this stuff, and they believed in God and they trusted Moses.
Finally.
Well. So there's
and it's not long lasting.
So there's a midrash in the Gemara, there's a midrash in the Talmud where one of the rabbis said, "Why did it have to tell us that? Of course they believed in God, and of course they trusted Moses. They just crossed the sea. They just saw the destruction of Pharaoh. They just saw 10 plagues. Of course they believed." And the answer comes down with this wonderful answer. It said, no. People that were slaves for that many generations and had seen what they saw and heard what they heard and seen the brutality and the cruelty of the world and the evil of the world, the fact that they were willing to take a step forward into the sea and believe that there was a tomorrow, that's the greatest miracle of Jewish history. That the greatest miracle wasn't the splitting of the sea. The greatest miracle was Vayaminu ba'Adonai b'Moshe avdo, that this people who had been so brutalized was willing to take a step forward. Now, you're a wonderful witness to this because you tell us so many beautiful stories about your grandparents. And you talk about your grandmother was the cook in the yeshiva in the Orthodox high school.
I had a crown, yeah.
The fact that people had seen what human eyes should never see and experience a kind of cruelty which is literally indescribable, and yet are willing to come back and begin families, join a faith community, serve a community. That has got to be the greatest miracle of Jewish history. The fact that we didn't give up after the Shoah, I think, is even a greater miracle than the splitting of the sea in the Torah.
Well, this story always reminds me, I once heard on a YouTube video, there was a period where I listened to lots of Shlomo Carlebach's stories. He's a great storyteller. And he tells a story that he was a little boy. I think he grew up in Vienna, if I'm not mistaken. And his father was a great rabbi. And right before right before all the men of the town were taken away, there was a Shabbos morning in his living room. They'd already pulled all the drapes. They didn't want the Nazis to see what was happening. And they had Shabbos services. And right before the Baruch Hu, everybody stood for Yishtabach, Nechatzi Kadesh, and right before the Baruch Hu, the man who was leading services turned around and looked at everyone and said, "What if this is the last time that these prayers are ever said?"
Wow.
And Shlomo Carlebach said, I was a little boy. I didn't know what to say. He said, so I looked at my father. My father said, so then let's sing them beautifully. This is a moment where they didn't know what their future was going to be.
Right.
But it's always been within our tradition to sing. To make that moment beautiful through song. We do that all the time. We do that in services, we do that at a bris, we do that in weddings, we do that in bar and bat mitzvahs, we do that constantly throughout our lives. We're a people that loves to sing, that loves to bring beauty to the moments, even if we understand that our existence is perhaps more fragile than we'd like to admit.
Yeah.
And here it's just one of the most touching stories, the splitting of the sea. And I have to tell you that when I do, I feel like in many ways Moses stands vindicated.
Oh, yeah.
Immediately before he's about to really encounter some trouble.
Well, no. See, this again, if this were a movie, this is where you'd end it.
Right.
Because this is triumphant and redemptive and beautiful.
Right.
But what's coming next is a lot deeper in many ways.
To be continued.
To be continued.
Dun, dun, dun. Well, we look forward to studying with you next week. The story of the book of Exodus continues beyond the splitting of the sea. We haven't even gotten to the definitive moment of our peoplehood. We look forward to studying with you next week. Have a wonderful week, everybody.
Take good care.